go in depth, over segment your market, because you need to understand this new trend emerging around sustainability, because for me, it's a major untapped market for a lot of brands and companies.
Coffee's for closers only.
So we've established my proposal is sound in principle. Now we're just haggling over price.
Let's see how much we're going for on eBay.
I mean, it's the same as Dunkin' Donuts. Costs 15 times the price.
Today's podcast is sponsored by Jennings Executive Search. I had a great conversation with John Jennings about the skills needed in different pricing roles. He and I think a lot alike. If you're looking for a new pricing role, or if you're trying to hire just the right pricing person, I strongly suggest you reach out to Jennings Executive Search. They specialize in placing pricing people. Say that 3 times fast. Welcome to Impact Pricing, the podcast where we discuss pricing, value, and the sustainable relationship between them. I'm Mark Stiving, and our guest today is Fabien Cros. Now, from now on, I'm going to say Fabien, because he gave me permission, but I had to do it right once. Here are 3 things you want to know about Fabien before we start. He is a data lead at Google, which tells me he's amazingly smart and has access to way more technology than any of the rest of us do. He's a founder at Pricing for the Planet. And he's a French guy who lived in Detroit for 7 years. And he learned to root for that team up north. Ugh. Welcome, Fabien.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
Let's ask the easy one. How'd you get into pricing?
Well, funny enough, it's a connection with Detroit. I moved actually, I was living in China at the time. I was finishing my business school. And I got a job offer at Accenture in the automotive center of excellence in Detroit. So as a 24, 25 years old young man, I moved to Detroit and I spent 7 years there. I loved it. I'm a big fan of the city. With my wife, we created an art gallery there. So we have just, amazing memory from Detroit. And the reason, going to Accenture and working in automotive, a huge piece of the business was around spare parts pricing. So I did a lot of, pricing, and then we moved out to spare parts to, service pricing and being smart about, how you can price services, going into not just automotive, but heavy equipment as well. And that's how I moved to data and analytics and AI. And then I, moved away, went back to Europe and join an AI startup and then Google right after that.
Yeah, it's a fascinating world. And just for kicks, I have to tell you that my very first pricing project was for spare parts. It was pretty, and there's so much money to be made in spare parts. Oh my gosh.
Absolutely.
So what we're going to talk about today, and this could be an interesting conversation, we're going to talk about pricing and sustainability. And I got to say, in all honesty, I don't know that I'm bought in. I'm convinced. Now, I love sustainability, right? I love nature. I love the idea that we're not destroying the planet. I have no idea what pricing has to do with any of this. So I'm just going to open it up to you. Tell me what I'm missing.
Yeah, I'm 2 paths on this topic. The first one, there is a very pragmatic path, which is what we've discovered through Pricing for the Planet, is that most of the company are still using what we call 19th century concepts, such as markup, such as a single bottom line approach. And a lot of company can benefit from actually a better and a more sophisticated pricing approach. I think we have a number, and it's coming from Stefan Miozzo, with whom I co-founded Pricing for the Planet, but I think it's almost like a quarter of industrial company are using value-based pricing. So it means that, 3/4 of the, industrial company are still using cost-plus approach. So what we say with Pricing for the Planet is, step 1 is, move to more like what we call 21st century concept, which is go more near value-based pricing. That way you can create additional revenue and additional profits. That way you can invest into sustainability. because most of the problem that we see when we have discussion with CEO is like, we don't have money to invest into sustainability. And
Okay, so
I would say,
I'm
go
going to pause
ahead,
you for a
Mark.
second. I got to pause you for a second. So I'm going to say what I just heard you say. I too teach value-based pricing. Of course, every pricing person teaches value-based pricing, right?
Yeah.
How do you move away from cost plus? There's a whole lot more revenue. There's a whole lot more profit. And so then what I heard you say was, but we want the CEO to take the incremental profit and invest it in this specific area, where most of us pricing people would just say, make more money. That's your job. Make more money and then invest it however you want. Okay. Back to you.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And it's a good point, Mark, because we need a funny study. What we did, we took, financial statement of, like the top 50 Fortune 500 companies. And we looked at those, financial statement about, their mission, where they want to be. And most of the keywords were really like 2030, goals, sustainability, frugality. And then we said, okay, fair enough. Those are good objectives. Now let's look at what the users are looking for today. So we use Google Trends and we said, okay, let's look at all those new trends. And we compare, the financial statement and what the people are looking for. People are looking for very different thing than what we can see on the financial statement. They are looking for second-hand, recycle, repair, recyclability, something, all those things that are very pragmatic, and we see a big disconnect. And when we zoom into the pricing world, we see the same thing. We see, big objective, we want to be carbon neutral. We want in 2050, we want to be, CO2 negative, and all those big statements. But there is a disconnect with what the current user is looking for today. And this gap, we need to bridge this gap because for two reasons. One, it's if we want to reach those, 2030, 2050 engagement, we need to be pragmatic and start concrete stuff, which is far from what we are doing today. And the second one is there is a huge market bubbling around sustainability. I would say, especially in Europe and especially on the West and East Coast, we can see, the market being not very uniform and, very homogeneous around those topics, but those markets are emerging. And we see a lot of brands not tapping into those markets for a lot of different reasons. But that's kind of the mission we have at Pricing for the Planet, is to say, hey, there is a market. We need to move away from the traditional, we have one price for everybody and, we have one approach for, all across our entire company, because the world is more complex. Segments are way more difficult and way more diverse than ever. And we cannot continue to do pricing like we were doing during the Industrial Revolution. And maybe because I know you want me to be very concrete, Mark. So to give you one concrete example, it's we love to use the example of markup. So for the past 50 years, most of the companies use markup to say, okay, I take my cost and I do my markup, etc. And that's my list price. If we do the same thing with sustainable product or services, the list price will be crazy and will be far from what the consumer or what the businesses are willing to pay. So we see a big gap. So that's what we call the 19th century concept. And what we call the 21st century concept is to pass along, to say, look, for sustainable products or green product or services, you will use the gray product or service structure, markup structure, and you will pass along the additional costs directly to the end user. So you continue to make the same amount of money than before, but you don't apply the markup on this additional, green kind of like additional cost to produce. That way it's affordable for the end user and you are not killing your profitability. So we have plenty of other examples, but this one is very concrete. It's like, we need to move away from 19th century concept and we need to move to adopt 21st century, which means we need to change the way we do business and we need to change the way we do pricing. So Mark, okay. Did I convince you?
Have you convinced me? No, but I want to make sense of all this. So before the concrete example you gave, I thought you were talking about something different. And so I want to bring that up in a minute. But the concrete example I actually liked a lot in the following sense. I'm going to, instead of using the word markup, I'll just use the word margin. And that is, we're giving up margin percent, but we're keeping the same margin dollars. Right.
Correct.
And so if you're increasing my cost for sustainable initiatives, I just pass that cost on. I just don't take a margin on that. Right. So
Absolutely.
as long as I'm raising it exactly the same, I have the same margin dollars. Now, CFOs are not a huge fan of margin. They like margin dollars, don't get me wrong, but they seem to love margin percents for some reason. And it's like, that's what that's what the investors pay them for. And so somehow you've got to get investors to say, hey, this is acceptable as well.
And absolutely. And I think what you are saying is very important, because the same way we are trying to change the way we do business, we need to change the way we do investment. And I think we see a lot of changes coming from, investors, especially in the ESG space. So we see actually, if we look at cost of capital, now it's kind of very beneficial for companies to be much more advanced in ESG. And it's not just, a question of like margin percentage or, margin dollars. It's really like investor will influence companies to be much more advanced around ESG. But you're right. The same way we change business, we need to change the financial industry as well. 100%.
Yep. Okay. So but by the way, I love the concrete example because it's the first time I've ever heard anybody say something that I thought had to do with pricing and sustainability.
Yeah.
So that was very good.
No, and I have a.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. So go ahead, Mark.
Nope, you.
No, I want. There is another one that I love. It's more about business model, because we put. And we like to be provocative. So when we say pricing for the planet, I would say it's way broader than kind of just pricing. I don't like to say just pricing, because pricing could mean a lot of different things. So we like to say very broad definition of pricing, including monetization. And what we see a lot of new business models that are kind of like green compliant, or, like great for the planet and great for the bottom line. And then we have a long list. So we talked with Ron Giuntini about like remanufacturing, for example. And we published a paper about the shoe industry. Like it's a, like $80 billion industry that is mostly linear. And, the opportunity to move to a circular model for them is huge. And it's a huge way actually to create growth, to continue to have growth, and to have, additional margin coming from this new business. And another concrete example, you have Doc Martens. They just released the ReWear platform, where they are, buying directly from the consumer, repurposing, remanufacturing the shoe, and offering those shoes as a second-hand product, which is cheaper, but actually the margin percentage is way higher. And you can go on their website. I think it's docmartens.rewear.com, and you can see usually they buy back. It's close to $20, I think, for a pair of boots. And then I don't have the exact number, but I think it's another like $20-$30 to kind of repair and repurpose the boots. And then they will sell it back for $100, for like $150 list price for a new pair of boots. So you can see from a pure profitability, it makes a lot of sense to go in this kind of much more circular model than the traditional linear model.
Yes. And so now what you just described to me is what I expected us to be talking about when we talked about pricing for the planet or sustainability. And that is, I often think of sustainability as a feature. Right now, there's lots of different features that you could think about in that realm, but think of it as a feature or a benefit that companies or people want to buy. And so now when you say pricing for sustainability, the question becomes, am I advertising the fact that I'm sustainable? Am I getting extra revenue because I'm sustainable? And as I do my product development or my business model development, Am I thinking about the fact that there's an entire group of people who care a lot about sustainability, a market segment that cares a lot about this? And so we could and should be investing in that. And so I take nothing away from anything that I just said, except for the fact that it just feels like a feature to me. It doesn't feel special.
Yeah, and I think I think that's where we need to do a lot of work, because I think for me, it's not a feature, because it's a different way of thinking. Because again, I would say, color or like material could be a feature. At least we are trying to convey this message that sustainability could be viewed as a feature for the end users, but it's a new way of doing business. And to take a very concrete example again, we talk a lot about shared value, which is like we are trying to align actually the economical, value created from a business with the societal needs. And, for us, it's this complementarity and this new angle. We talk a lot about, triple bottom line. When we say, pricing for the planet, we want to create a price tag that is not just one piece of the triple bottom line, which is the first P, profit, but we want to have a price that is in 3 dimensions. The traditional price, so the profit. We want to have a KPI about the planet, and we need to define, each company needs to define the planet KPI, and we need a KPI about, the society and the impact on people. And for us, we cannot talk about pricing for the planet without having this triptych, because for us, it's too easy when we really think about the impact of companies. It's too easy to have one price hiding all the bad things that we do on the planet and on the people. And I don't want to finger point, but for example, when we think about Walmart, when we think that at some point a lot of their employees were using food stamp from the government, what it means is that the pricing that they were using at Walmart for their products, indirectly, it was kind of like they were relying on the government to pay for the employees. And as I'm not a US citizen, but as a global citizen, I think it's not fair that the society is paying this kind of indirect costs, those externalities that some companies are, for a lot of different reasons, but are leveraging today. That's something that we need to stop, because we are obsessed with only one P. We need to move away from that. And I think the only way is to give the end user the choice, or at least the visibility on, like, yes, it may be very cheap, but it's very bad for the environment and it's very bad for your community. And on the, on the other, flipping the coin, it's like, yes, it might be more expensive, but actually it's a very good impact on your community and a very good impact on the planet. And after, it's up to the end user to take the decision, but the decision needs to be bright and fair.
Okay, I honor the intent. I think it is very, very hard to do well, and I'm not sure it's going to work. And I'll say that in the following way. First off, in the 80s, we had this big push. People would put "Made in the USA" on their clothes or on their products. And I got to tell you, nowadays you don't see that. Do you know why? Because people didn't care, right? What we'd rather buy cheap Chinese goods than expensive goods that are made in the USA. So, I'm not sure that it's going to make a difference to the way people make decisions. And I think a bigger thing in my mind is the fact that in order for me to have a price around ESG or a price around good for the planet, it actually requires somebody to go out and say, yes, this is the price you have, right? This is your rating in that respect. And people play games with these ratings all the time. People get paid for these ratings. And so I'm not sure I believe it. And I'm not sure that I would buy differently. I'm not sure most people would buy differently than price, regardless of what you said there.
Absolutely. And 2 points on this one. First one, coming back to, I invite all the audience to look again at the data, and we see more and more people very conscious about the impact on community and the impact on the planet. I'm not saying everybody is buying based on those, decisions, but we see more and more people, and especially people with a traditional, higher willingness to pay. So there is definitely a change in the mindset of the consumers. And then what we see emerging is regulation. And we see that a lot in Europe. We see that a little bit in California. We see that in China as well. So we see governments are actually, they will try to influence, and they have no choice because, Paris Agreement, they have the same thing. They want to be, leader in circular economy. I think Washington did a post on this one. Beijing did a post on this one. So this consciousness about sustainability will be required by the government. So for us, it's really like we want to say, you have these very nice windows of being a leader. It's right now. Like in 5 to 7 years, it will be regulation. You will have no choice. So you will have to pay taxes on like carbon emission. So by design, your price will reflect, your pollution will reflect your impact on the communities, will reflect your impact on, most of the different layers of your value chain. So that's where I think, you have this nice, 5 to 7 years where you can influence the regulation, because right now, and I'm honest with you, Mark, we are far from having all the, like the answers and all the solution for everything, but we are trying to say, hey, it's now the time to really think about it and to champion those topics. It doesn't mean that everything will be successful, but by trying and, trial and error, you can show the path, and then regulation will pick up and will say, hey, actually, we like what this company A is doing. It's maybe not the best thing, but we will try to use that as an example or as a benchmark. And then we will align the entire industry based on what company A did, a couple of years ago, et cetera, et cetera. So, it's really emerging. It's like I'm working at Google, so I have the responsibility for AI as well. And it's like the big difference between sustainability and AI. AI went so fast that nobody could really leverage AI as a key differentiator. Sustainability is completely different, because we know we have, 5, 7 years. So we have time to really champion sustainability and make it, purely part of the DNA of the company. And we know by actually experience that it's working. We can use Patagonia. We have a bunch of examples like that. We use a lot Decathlon sporting goods in Europe. They picked up this fight, and now they are way above, the market. We use a lot Schneider Electric. If you look at the market cap of Schneider Electric, I don't have the exact number, but it's way higher than their competitors, because actually they use sustainability as part of their new DNA. And now they are actually quite advanced on this topic. And now we are using Schneider Electric as a benchmark. So they are influencing, regulation, et cetera, et cetera. So again, we know that it's actually could be a winning factor for the companies interested to kind of like leverage sustainability as a competitive advantage. And
I have no qualms. I have no qualms about trying to get companies to use this as a competitive advantage. I have a feeling that it isn't going to take off the way you think it is. I mean, by the way, Patagonia is headquartered here in Reno, Nevada, and I love Patagonia, but I never would have said, "Oh, these guys are high on the sustainable." I certainly know they're high on social good. But I don't buy Patagonia clothes because of that. I buy Patagonia clothes because I love the clothes. And so I think that's the big issue.
But that's a very good point, actually. And I think that's something that, we I'm not sure you've seen, but we did our annual summit in April. And I think we had so BCG was a partner of our annual summit. And we talked about something called the Green Premium Quandary. And I think what you're explaining, it's exactly going into this direction, which is the traditional way of like 19th century concept. It's like yes, we have, one segment which is kind of like planet friendly or sustainability friendly. And then we have, a big part of the segment they don't care. And some actually they don't like sustainability. Well, actually, what BCG did, they did a lot of like really, really fine pricing market studies and conjoint analysis. And what they've discovered that they found 5 segments. And actually the first segments, which is really like passionate about sustainability, for some categories, the willingness to pay was like 60, 70, 100%, more than the traditional price. But the traditional way of thinking was like, oh, no, we cannot go above 20% premium because we believe that, it's not fair. No, actually, you have one segment that is ready to double the price. And then we have a second segment that is actually up to like 30, 50% premium. And then we have a big long tail of people, they don't care. But I think people and most of the companies today, they don't do the homework well. They use what they think and they apply how they shop to, the way they are doing, traditional pricing and traditional business. And again, they are missing the point that you have a big part of the market is actually super concerned about sustainability. And, they have money and they are ready to pay a lot. So I think your example of Patagonia is perfect. Like, yes, you have a lot of people, they buy because of, the quality of the clothes. But actually you have a huge market, and I'm buying Patagonia not because I like the clothes. Actually, I don't like the clothes because for me, it's kind of like normal clothes, but I buy them just because actually I like the message about sustainability. And for me, it's very important and it's way above, and I'm ready to pay, like 100% more for a jacket because I know I can keep it for another 10 years. I can bring it back anytime because they have a circular model. They will repair my jacket. So again, you and me, we are in different segments. I'm not saying, you're wrong and I'm right. I'm far from saying that, but I'm just trying to illustrate that we are in a world where we see huge discrepancy between one segment from another. And that's something that we didn't see in the past, especially because we were in a more kind of like the norms were kind of like closer all together. Like the market were not that differentiated. But now with sustainability, and again, it's kind of the data showing us that you have a subset of the population. They are so passionate and they are so convinced that, it's crucial that you cannot forget this market. And this market segment could actually fuel a lot of the money and a lot of the, financial need that is required to move to a more sustainable, business model, for example.
Okay, so that's the second thing you said today that I liked a lot. So I'm going to restate what you just, I know like your word. I'm going to restate what I just heard you say though. And that is, there is a market segment. I have no idea how big it is. You didn't say, but there's a market segment that's willing to pay a lot for sustainability. And companies who go after that market segment will end up with much higher margins, probably lower volume, but much higher margins, which is great for the bottom line, great for profitability. And there's nothing at all wrong with that strategy. I think the challenge there is that big companies today who have huge volume can't take their entire company and say, we're going to move it to sustainability because they've already built a reputation. They've already built a brand. I think this is something that new companies could do, or big companies could spin off a new company or a new brand and say, look, we're just going to build for this marketplace and structure around that. And I could see that A, being successful for the consumers that want it, and B, being successful for the businesses that want to do that.
Yeah, and you're right. It's a step-by-step approach. But, I have two good examples on this one, on big companies actually moving from, traditional brand reputation to sustainability. You have Michelin, the tire company. So that they explored, especially on the B2B, a much more circular business model, because again, they champion the concept of like tire as a service. So again, huge move and very successful move. And at the same time, they are transitioning to a very like sustainable type of tires. So I think, they are very successful moving from traditional brand image to, sustainability oriented business image. And again, I'm coming back to Decathlon. And if you didn't hear the story, instead of selling sport goods, now they are renting it, which make a big difference because instead of, having an incentive to sell yoga mats, bicycles, snowboards, all that stuff, they have an incentive to actually make it really efficient so they can get it back and rent it again. So you can see how the entire shift is going on. It's like before, my only KPI is to sell more. Huge impact on the planet, huge impact in terms of CO2 emission, because my incentives are not aligned with, a planet-friendly approach. You shift the model. Now your model is to rent it. So it's to make sure that your assets are, they have a long life cycle, that the usage of your assets is maximized. So now your financial incentive is aligned to your planet, or our planet and our society incentives. And I love those numbers because for the end user, it's coming from Decathlon. From the end users, it's 6 times cheaper to use, rental. And of course, because we are all buying, snowboard, and then, for 9 or 10 months, it's in our garage doing nothing. But for the company, and it's still a proof of concept. So I'm cautious, but they are saying it's between 3 and 10 times more profitable for Decathlon. And for me here, it's a no-brainer. It's like, wow, actually, that's a very good reason to move to this more sustainable approach, because it's good for the bottom line, it's good for the planet, it's good for the user. But it requires a lot of time to rethink, to realign the incentives, to change the business model. Because as you mentioned, it's a huge change for any big brand. It's like, okay, we will stop selling stuff and we will still renting stuff. It's a tremendous change for sure.
Yep.
But
Fabien, we are running out of time. I would love to comment on that, but I'm not going to. Otherwise, we would just keep going. But this really has been fascinating. I hugely appreciate you sharing with us. And I am going to ask the final question anyway. What is one piece of pricing advice you'd give our listeners that you think could have a big impact on their business?
I think I will come back to what I said about, doing your homework, doing your conjoint analysis, going in depth, not doing kind of like a high level 10,000 feet, conjoint analysis. Go in depth, over segment your market, because you need to understand, this new trend emerging around sustainability, because for me, it's a major untapped market for a lot of brands and companies.
Nice. Thank you so much for your time today, Fabien. If anybody wants to contact you, how can they do that?
Super easy. They can go on www.pricingfortheplanet.com and contact us through the website, or they can contact me directly on LinkedIn. It's Fabien with a E, Cros, Cros.
Perfect. And to our listeners, thank you for your time. If you enjoyed this, would you please leave us a rating and a review? And if you have any questions about pricing or this podcast, feel free to email me, mark@impactpricing.com. Now, go make an impact. Thanks again to Jennings Executive Search for sponsoring our podcast. If you're looking to hire someone in pricing, I suggest you contact someone who knows pricing people. Contact Jennings Executive Search.